When people hear the word socialism, they often imagine very different things. Some picture government control of everything. Others think of universal healthcare, strong labor unions, or Nordic welfare states. Some associate it with revolutionary politics, while others connect it to democratic reform. The confusion exists because socialism is not one single blueprint. It is a broad family of ideas centered on one major question: who should own and control the productive resources of society? In capitalist systems, factories, land, technology, and businesses are mostly privately owned and operated for profit. Socialism challenges that arrangement by arguing that the means of production should be socially owned in some form, so that economic life serves the wider community rather than only private owners. The phrase means of production sounds technical, but the idea is simple. It refers to the assets used to create goods and services, factories, farms, machines, offices, infrastructure, and in modern economies, platforms, data systems, and major financial institutions. Socialists argue that because these assets shape everyone's lives, their control should not be concentrated in the hands of a small ownership class. Social ownership can take many forms. It might mean state ownership, where public institutions run key industries. It might mean worker cooperatives, where employees collectively own and manage a company. It can also mean community ownership, municipal ownership, collective ownership, or employee shareholding systems. The common thread is a shift away from purely private control toward broader social control. This is why socialism sits on the left side of the political spectrum in most countries. Left-wing politics generally emphasizes equality, social welfare, labor rights, and limits on concentrated economic power. Socialism takes those concerns and applies them directly to ownership and production. Instead of asking only how wealth should be redistributed after markets create it, socialism asks how wealth is produced in the first place, who makes the decisions, and who benefits. That does not mean every socialist wants the same kind of economy. Some favor democratic institutions and gradual reform. Others have supported revolutionary change. Some want markets to remain, while others see markets as part of the problem. The ideology is unified by its critique of private ownership, but divided over how society should replace or reshape it. One of the biggest divisions is between non-market socialism and market socialism. Non-market socialism seeks to replace market competition and profit-driven production with planning. Supporters argue that capitalism creates waste, instability, inequality, and repeated crises because businesses must chase profit and accumulate capital even when social needs are unmet. In a planned socialist system, resources would ideally be allocated according to collective priorities rather than market prices. Housing, energy, healthcare, transport, and industry could be coordinated to meet human needs. But critics ask how planners can gather enough information, respond to changing preferences, and avoid bureaucracy or authoritarian control. The debate over planning is one of the central practical questions in socialist thought. Market socialism takes a different approach. It keeps some features of markets, such as monetary prices, competition, and sometimes profit incentives, but changes who owns the firms and who receives the gains. In a market socialist economy, companies might be owned by their workers, communities, or public funds, while still selling goods and services in markets. Supporters argue this preserves the flexibility of markets while reducing the power imbalance between owners and workers. A worker-owned firm, for example, might distribute profits among employees or make decisions democratically. Market socialism therefore tries to separate markets from capitalism. It says that trade and prices do not necessarily require private capitalists to own the productive system. Socialism emerged as a political force during the modern age of industrialization. In the 18th and 19th centuries, revolutions, factories, urban poverty, and new class divisions transformed Europe and beyond. Industrial capitalism created enormous wealth, but it also produced harsh working conditions, child labor, insecure employment, slums, and extreme inequality. Early socialists responded to these social problems by imagining cooperative communities and fairer economic arrangements. Later, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels gave socialism a powerful historical and economic framework. They argued that capitalism was defined by class conflict between those who owned productive property and those who had to sell their labor. By the late 19th century, socialism increasingly meant opposition to capitalism and support for a post-capitalist order based on social ownership. Marx and Engels did not invent socialism, but they deeply shaped its meaning. Their analysis focused on exploitation, class struggle, and the instability of capitalist production. They argued that capitalism constantly revolutionizes technology and production, but also concentrates wealth, creates crises, and treats labor as a commodity. In their view, socialism would be a transitional stage after capitalism, leading eventually to a classless society. Not all socialists accepted this exact theory. Some preferred ethical arguments about justice and cooperation. Others emphasized democracy, religion, nationalism, or trade unionism. Still, Marxism became one of the most influential socialist traditions because it connected economic ownership to political power and placed socialism within a theory of historical change. By the early 20th century, the international socialist movement split into major tendencies. Communism and social democracy became the two dominant paths. Communists generally supported revolutionary transformation and the creation of a socialist state that would abolish capitalism. Social Democrats increasingly worked through elections, parliaments, labor parties, and reforms. They sought to improve workers' lives through unions, public services, regulation, and welfare policies. The split became sharper after the Russian Revolution and the rise of the Soviet Union, which became the first major state to claim a socialist identity. From that point on, socialism was often associated, fairly or unfairly, with the Soviet economic model of state ownership and centralized planning. The Soviet example made socialism globally powerful and globally controversial. Supporters saw it as proof that a non-capitalist system could industrialize, defeat poverty, and challenge imperial powers. Critics pointed to authoritarian rule, political repression, shortages, and the lack of democratic control. This history matters because it shaped public understanding of socialism for generations. In many countries, socialism became synonymous with state planning and one-party rule. But in other contexts, especially in democratic politics, socialism remained tied to labor rights, public ownership, welfare states, and social equality. The word carried different meanings depending on national history, Cold War politics, and whether people encountered socialism as a party, a union movement, a revolution, or a welfare reform agenda. Social democracy deserves special attention because it began inside the socialist movement but evolved into something distinct. Early social democrats often still imagined socialism as a long-term goal. After World War II, many embraced a mixed economy instead, mostly capitalist markets combined with strong state intervention. This included progressive taxation, public health care, unemployment insurance, pensions, labor protections, regulation, and Keynesian economic management. The goal was not necessarily to abolish private ownership, but to soften capitalism's inequalities and instability. In countries such as those in Western Europe and the Nordic region, these policies helped build extensive welfare states. Academics sometimes called such systems democratic socialist, but they are more commonly described as social democratic because social ownership remained limited. Democratic socialism overlaps with social democracy but is not identical. Democratic socialists usually argue that democracy should extend beyond voting and into the economy itself. They may support elections, civil liberties, multi-party politics, and constitutional rights, while also calling for more public ownership, worker control, or cooperative institutions than traditional social democrats do. In modern usage, democratic socialism often rejects the authoritarian legacy associated with Soviet-style systems. It presents socialism as something that must be built through democratic consent and accountable institutions. This is one reason the term became more prominent after the Cold War, especially as many people wanted to discuss equality and public power without endorsing one-party rule or centralized command economies. Socialist politics has never belonged to only one type of organization. It has been internationalist, emphasizing solidarity across borders, and also nationalist, linking social ownership to national development or independence. It has worked through political parties, but also through anti-party movements. It has overlapped with trade unions, yet sometimes criticized unions for being too cautious or too tied to existing institutions. Socialists have also joined broader causes such as feminism, environmentalism, anti-colonialism, and progressivism. That makes socialism less like a single machine and more like a recurring argument about power, power between workers and owners, citizens and states, communities and markets, the present generation and future ones. After the revolutions of 1989 and the collapse of Soviet-style governments in Eastern Europe, socialism lost much of its global prestige. In many advanced capitalist countries, a neoliberal consensus replaced the older social democratic consensus. Privatization, deregulation, free trade, and reduced public ownership became dominant policy trends. Many former socialist and social democratic parties moved toward third-way politics, keeping commitments to equality, opportunity, and welfare while abandoning class-based politics and large-scale public ownership. But socialism did not disappear. After the 2008 global financial crisis, interest revived, especially among younger people facing inequality, debt, insecure work, expensive housing, and distrust of financial elites. The old question returned in a new form: if markets create prosperity but also crisis and inequality, how much of economic life should society control together? So what is socialism, in the clearest sense? It is a broad political and economic tradition arguing that the resources used to produce wealth should be owned or controlled socially, not merely privately. Beyond that, socialists disagree sharply. Some want planning, others markets. Some emphasize state ownership, others worker cooperatives. Some seek revolution, others democratic reform. Some focus on class, others connect socialism to climate, gender, race, or anti-colonial struggles. Its influence on the modern world is enormous, even where socialist parties never took full power. Welfare states, labor rights, public services, and debates about inequality all carry traces of socialist pressure. Whether one supports or opposes it, socialism remains one of the central ideas for understanding modern politics because it asks a question every society must answer: who should control the economy, and in whose interest should it be run? If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.